Greetings. I assume you're here because you want to know the very core of how Springlocks suits work, and more importantly, you want to know how I made sense of Scraptrap's inconsistencies, and how I will remodel him in order to make sense in your tiny head. First, let's get into the basic stuff that pretty much everyone knows. Springlock animatronics are animatronics that double as both animatronics and suits. How can this possibly be? Well, animatronics have endoskeletons, which is basically the bones to the animatronic. So how are you meant to fit inside an animatronic with bones? Well, if you move these bones out of the way, then there's space for you inside. So how exactly do you just move the endoskeleton out of the way? Do you just take it out? Well, I'm afraid it's not that simple. Springlock suits have little locks called Springlock that hold the endoskeleton out of place, making room for you to climb inside. Now, if you thought as I have, you may just think that the Springlocks move the endoskeleton to one side of the animatronic. But if that were the case, you wouldn't be able to fit inside. No, instead, the endoskeleton basically encases you in this basket sort of structure that widens with the Springlocks. It doesn't move the entire thing out of the way, it moves little individual parts out of the way. The tip of the Springlock resembles a bolt or other screw-like structures that you will use a hand crank in order to coil. It seems like many people choose to ignore this part of the process, instead aiming to just click the Springlocks in place. However, this is not how it works, as Film Guide clearly states in FNAF 3.
To change the animatronics to suit mode, insert and turn firmly the hand crank provided by the manufacturer. Turning the crank will recoil and compress the animatronic part around the sides of the suit, providing room to climb inside.
I have made an animation of this process, which isn't too long, so I will share it with you now. To recap what you just saw, you enter the hand crank into the Springlocks, and turning it, you will force many of the endoskeleton parts around the edges of the suit so you can fit inside. Alright, now on to the part where I talk about the issues I have with stuff related to Springlock suits. Basically, criticism. If you don't want to see this part, I have timestamps in the description, so you can just skip this part. Alright, the first thing I want to talk about are these weird rings around Springtrap's eyes. You may think that this is translucent plastic, considering the fact that you can see Springtrap's pupils. But in FNAF Help Wanted, you can clearly see that these are actually made out of metal. These seem so random and out of place at first, they don't even seem to have a function. So I rattled around my brain for ages trying to find a solution to these really weird rings. But after a while, I finally thought of something that somewhat makes sense and is featured in my animation. These rings must be what hold and give power to the original animatronic eyes that are meant to be there, that you take out so you can see. Which brings me to the next part of the video. There's a comment in my last video of the animation that I just showed you. Specifically, this part at the bottom. This user said, "By the way, you don't remove the endo eyes because the movie explains otherwise." I assume that's because in the movie they look like animatronic eyes. However, I do not believe this to be true, and I wrote a response to this person explaining why I believe this. The response reads as follows: The movie's non-canon, which is very clear by its inconsistencies, like how the books describe Springlock suits are also inconsistent. It is clear that the eyes must be removed because in the games, you can see William's rotting, bloodshot, ghostly eyes are clearly not an animatronic's eyes, further supported by the fact you can see his eyes in the skull in the corpse model. Plus, if the eyes couldn't be removed, how would you see? Clearly the mouth is too low because you can see William's mouth is at Springtrap's mouth level in the games. Also, I know what some of you may be saying. These eyes are way too forward in Springtrap's head, so the eyes wouldn't be in the right place. It would look ridiculous. And to that I say no. William's head is in the way, therefore it couldn't go all the way back as it should have. In the animation I show that it's a bar that goes down. William's head would have blocked this from going all the way down, which I know I didn't show very clearly in the animation. That's because what I tried to create was limited by my animation skills. And before you say it, no, this pathetic little bar wouldn't pierce his flesh. Only the strongest pieces of endoskeleton would actually pierce his flesh. The rest of it would simply surround him in it. What probably killed him were the bars around his neck that would have suffocated him. It may surprise you that people these days actually try to create Springlock suits. And to that I'd like to turn your attention to this phenomenal YouTuber, which I highly encourage you to check out, called Technofur. What he has done with this project is nearly perfect, and I can't wait to see the finished result. But there's only so far you can go with these kind of projects, and there's two things I noticed that I want to point out to you guys. I really hate to say this because I'm not an engineer, I don't know anything about doing any of this stuff, and he's probably almost done, so I hate to crap on his work, but these are things that I felt I had to point out. Number 1, lack of hand crank. I already described this, so I don't have to go more in depth on it. But number 2, he seems to have what looks like the Endo 01 design for the head, which shouldn't be there. As I have said, the only way for Springlock suits to make sense is if the endoskeleton is a very minimal, basic, bar-like structure everywhere, almost like a basket. Having this giant block as a head right in the center pokes holes in pretty much everything, and you wouldn't really be able to fit inside of this if this head is inside as well. I do not know if this is a temporary thing, but it is something I've noticed ever since I first saw this video. But I think that concludes my criticism for now, and we can move on to the next part of the video.